Good evening. How are you today? Well, the plot continues. It's comfortable today. I couldn't get out yesterday because I was filing papers in the Court of Appeals, and just as I was approaching 5 o'clock when I was going to file the papers, we had a tornado which killed my bandwidth, didn't kill the electricity, and so I had to go off to my office to file because our computers were intact. So I didn't get to walk and talk yesterday, which is a shame because I was very comfortable after the rain stopped last night. So today I'm out and it's pleasant, and the story continues to be Ogre Trump and the question of how to handle him. And handle him, it seems to me, means punishment. The province of Trump is a hateful place. He lives comfortably in a world of intense, unfair attacks, brutal language, and not a care in the world for any person driven by ambition like we've rarely seen in a lifetime. He does fit the profile of the modern day dictator. I'm not sure even the dictators in other nations as they exist today compare unfavorably when put next to him. So when you have such a person who's actually threatening persons by attacking them and by leading them and by presenting a profile of violence, how do you react? Now, I don't presume to put myself in the position of the judge, but it's clear to me, and I assume it's clear to the judge as well, that Trump is testing her. He's testing to see what he can get away with in the open, even as several courts, have the power to stop him. So what's working in his favor is having been president, having been brutal, having been more effective than mobsters in their small families, because he exists on a national scale and he's doing this. And he's evil. And by every indication, by every test, by every standard one would apply. So, how does this shape up then, the confrontation in the D.C. court over his efforts to overthrow the government? And isn't it perfect that he would continue to ignore law and justice and these kinds of things in his race to return to office so he can protect himself and create even more havoc and more of a dictatorship than he contemplated before he lost the election, perhaps because of who he was and what he wanted. So we have Special Counsel Smith proposing those matters that can be discussed publicly because the information's already been received or is out there, and what cannot be. And I looked at the order, and it says nothing about Trump's misconduct presently, what he's doing that would compromise those people out there that he's attacking. And the proof that his impact is threatening and disastrous is proven by the fact that the security experts are guarding Special Counsel Smith. That security has increased for Judge Chutkan, who's handling the case. And that a deputy working with Jack Smith also has security. So we are responding to it individually, when we have a man, Trump, in court who is subject to its jurisdiction and those rules that would apply to any other defendant. Thus, it's still true that there's a man above the law and that he is potentially compromising the judge on the case, the prosecutor on the case, the witnesses on the case, and we're talking about what someone can talk about publicly. So, what would I suggest we should do? Well, because the test is what I say, that is, if you're not going to stop me, I'm going to keep doing this. Okay, so I won't release that information. I'll just attack. I'll talk about how the prosecutor is mentally imbalanced. I'll talk about the judge and how she couldn't possibly be fair because she was appointed by Obama. These are the things I'll talk about. And I'll talk about them until I convince the nation that this is the story. Just as I convince many people, at least in the Republican Party, the crazies, the MAGA nuts that follow me around, that the election was a big cheat, a fraud. Without evidence, I did that. So I don't have to talk about these things. I won't talk about those subjects. I'll just continue to bash all these people. And what are you going to do about that? And the answer is, you better do something about it. Because literally our democracy hangs in the balance. There was an interesting discussion on Ari tonight in which he went back to an old myth. And it was the myth of Oedipus. His point was that despite what Oedipus wanted to avoid, he couldn't. His fate was sealed. And what he wanted to avoid was killing his father and wedding his mother. Now, it's kind of an interesting story in one way because the key player, Oedipus, while this thing comes true for him, he lives into an older age and dies. But of course, on the way, he blinds himself to the dream and vision that he had that he was going to do this, and so he was fighting to avoid his fate. The problem with the story as an example is that we don't know Trump's fate. We don't know that the fate is what we would have it, which is that fate of destruction to him, not us. That he ultimately is brought down and imprisoned, and he can have his liver eaten every night, grow back during the day, and be eaten again. That's from the myth of Prometheus, if I'm correct. So it's an interesting question about fate. You know me about Seneca, the fates will lead you to your destiny or drag you to it. But what is that fate? Can you distinguish it? And in the case of Trump, when you look at him, you're looking at a man who has ducked and dodged the adverse effect of his misconduct when it comes to the impeachment, and now we're working on prosecutions. So his fate is still unclear. Like a good story, the suspense is astounding, but unlike reality, where the suspense can be terribly painful to us. And how can we affect what we think the fate must be? And the answer is, we have to fight it. There was a film, what was it, Final Destination, and they couldn't avoid their destination, their fate. And it was kind of fun to watch. The plot point is exactly what I said, but there was some ingenuity involved, and it was kind of fun to watch. But what we have is a situation in which there are two things that can be done, and to a great extent, neither you nor I can affect those things. For example, I commented about on the weekend how our hosts, not all of them, but some of them, sat there like a bump on a log when lies were spread before us in the Trumpian way by his hired mouthpiece, who said that he wasn't interested in politics, he was only there as a lawyer, when in fact he was talking politics. And he was talking trash talk, and he was accusing everybody else not in the room. So, how do we deal with that situation? In my opinion, and we have examples of it, we have Maddow, Hayes, Reed, Milber, Wallace. And at the other networks we have people too. I mentioned MSNBC because I see it the most, I hear it the most. We have people who know how to question. And so they come prepared and they cabin the witness or person so that they don't get away with the lies that deceive, that affect the public attitude about what's going on. And so we had Ari with the lawyer asking him about his client. We have questions being put by people who know how to question what is true so that it offsets the nonsense they're talking about. One of my favorites is that Trump just had an aspiration that the results be different, an aspiration to overthrow the government. Of course, the notion of an aspiration is not for something low and mean. It's supposedly to be something wonderful, but to Trump, getting back in office, that's wonderful. You know, so there's a distortion within the language all the time. And so people will be, you'll hear it on the bus, you'll hear it at the water cooler from those people who buy this nonsense. Oh yeah, it was just aspirational. He wasn't planning for him to do it. No, he certainly was. The sequence of conversations is, you know, I want you to do this. You know, I'm calling Georgia, I want you to do this. I'm calling the Speaker of the House in Arizona, I want you to do this. And if you only have the lies and no one to contradict that, then you may think, hey, is this guy getting a raw deal? Now this operates on two levels. One is about the case, but the other is about the principles. And I just keep hitting them and banging on them and saying, why didn't you go after others this way? And well, for one thing, it shows us that our Attorney General should have been shit-canned a long time ago. But we are where we are. So number one, if you're going to have a player like Eastman on your show, or one of Trump's lawyers, prepare. And if you don't think you can handle him, do not take the interview. Because the responsibility of the journalist in this situation is to know who he is and what he or she can do. And if they can't handle the mongrel dog, then they shouldn't be in the room with him. That's number one. Now the second part of this procedural disaster is, what does a court do? And I think it's elementary. I don't mean it as an insult, but it is elementary to me that if I'm Smith, I want the judge to tell him, you stop this or I'll put you in jail. I just don't see anything short of that. And why wouldn't you do that? The facts are there. Because you're intimidated. Just what he's done to everybody else who's in a position to shut this man down, they're not doing it. And why wouldn't we do it? Because if we don't do it, this judge and this proceeding and our prosecutor are owned by Trump. And that's not a good place to be. Because if he can do this stuff and nothing happens to him, then he'll just keep doing it. And people will be hurt. Witnesses, And people whose job it is to enforce the law, for failing to do it with Trump, are putting themselves and their staffs, and frankly, our system of law and justice at risk. It's just not acceptable. And, we could say, we understand it, and would you do what you say if you were there? And that's easier for me, because I have no reservations about what I'm saying. I would do it myself. And maybe because I think this way, I would never be in a position like that. And I'm fine with that, don't get me wrong. I'd rather be faithful to myself and to what I think is right and what I believe is true than to have some position that would have me curtail who I am and what I do and why I do it. I had a conversation with a very respectable leading lawyer today in the DC area, and it was enjoyable to talk to another lawyer who has had a long career doing lots of things, who shares the view I have. And there are others, and probably among you who are listening to me, self-selected because we agree on so many things. And the principal ground of our being for bringing us together, and what this attorney thought, and what is needed in the circumstance in which we're concerned about fate doing us in, is to force this person to recognize our laws, to shut him down if he's going to threaten people, and we're going to pretend that that's not a big issue, and that he must not be allowed to drag persons and families and the process through the dirt when what he's saying is a lie. You want to talk about free speech? I, for one, do not think any person is entitled in a public arena that has outcomes. I do not believe that they can lie without being tattooed with a signal tattoo that says, you can't trust this person, ever. You can't give this person responsibility, ever, if you care about having and continuing a democracy and a republic. So, that's some of my thinking today, and I hope to be out tomorrow. I have a deposition during the day, and I'm going to do some more work on it tonight. So, all the best for my Cathedral of Trees. Talk to you soon.